I was born September 24th, 1925, in Kansas City, Kansas, to Edward and Lena Hayes. I am the third of three children. I graduated high school there in Kansas City, Kansas in 1943. I moved to Omaha, Nebraska in 1943. I landed a job at an insurance company. I met and married Kenneth Baker Owen. We were married September 1st, 1946, to which two daughters were born. Vicki Elaine Owen, and she was born July 14, 1950, and Donna Jean Owen, born June 23, 1952. While the girls were in high school, I attended business college and worked as a legal secretary and an insurance secretary, off and on, not full-time. After we retired, we moved to California to be near our two daughters. Kenny and I celebrated our golden wedding anniversary in September of this year, September 1, 1996. We have three grandchildren: Janelle Christensen, Rachel Stewart, and Eric Christensen. We live in Grass Valley, California, and I am grateful for the many blessings I've enjoyed throughout my life. And it hasn't always been easy. There's been ups and downs, but more ups than downs, thankfully. That's it.
Okay, thanks, Mom. You want to talk about any of your vacations, or Aunt Helen or Uncle Ed?
My brother, Edward Hayes, Jr., he died when he was 47 of a heart attack in 1968. My sister, Helen James, she is 77 and has some health problems. And we were a close family, and then in my married life, we traveled quite a bit to the Ozarks and Wyoming, and with the girls. And all in all, I would say our life is a success, and I'm happy. Let's see.
Do you remember your swim lessons and stuff when you were a little girl?
What?
Your swimming lessons when you were a little girl?
Swimming lessons. We learned to dog paddle down in the Ozarks in a swimming hole that was ice cold. It was a mountain stream. And we learned to dog paddle first, and then we learned the overhand stroke. And we had friends in the Ozarks to visit. And many happy memories in the lake at Knoll, Missouri, with our friends.
Yeah, that's right. You kids went swimming there too.
So I really don't have a whole lot to say.
How about the Shingletons?
Yes, the Shingleton family, they lived in Knoll, Missouri, and they had 8 children, and there were 3 of us and my dad. And we would go down there 2 weeks every August, and most of the time we stayed with them, but a lot of the time we rented cabins in those days. And but we would travel throughout the Ozarks to Eureka Springs and Springdale, Arkansas, Rogers, Arkansas. We enjoyed that northwest part of Arkansas so much. It's the scenic beauty of it, and the people, and so we have many happy childhood memories of that.
Tell the story of you guys eating squirrels.
That wasn't there, I don't think. We never ate squirrels there.
Did they eat possum?
No, they didn't. That was another family. Mrs. Shingleton had 8 children and her husband, of course. And I can still remember Edith with me holding a baby on this hip in a cook stove that she fired up with corn cobs and kindling wood and so forth. And she would carry a baby on this hip and cook on the cook stove. And the only time she sat down was to nurse the children.
That's
Yeah.
Mrs. Shingleton?
Uh-huh.
How did your dad know them?
Well, my dad met Walter Shingleton in Kansas City, Kansas, before he moved down to the Ozarks. And Walt, he made home brew during Prohibition days. And it was against the law then, but he made it for his family. And we would frequently go on rides, we called it, in the car. That was a big treat. And we'd stop by the Shingletons and have a mug of cold beer. The kids too, home brew. And she gave me her recipe, and the way it went was, instead of measuring things, she said a pinch of salt, a can of malt, whatever the ingredients were, and then she says let it brew for so many days and wait for it to come to a head or something like that. And then they would bottle it, and I think they had a lid way to bottle it. Or did they leave it in a big crock? No, that was to ferment it. But anyway, they'd put it down in their cave. They didn't have refrigeration in those days. They had a cave outdoors, and it'd be cool down there. And so, that's after they moved to the Ozarks. But in Kansas City, Kansas, I don't know, they must have kept it cool. Probably in the cellar. We had cellars then, and it was cool down there. And because I can remember it was cool home brew, and even the kids liked to mug a home brew beer. And and they were unschooled family, but they were very close, and they laughed a lot, I remember that. And we played cards with them in the evening in the Ozarks by kerosene lamp. And all the kids and the parents would sit and play cards, and how much we enjoyed being a part of their family. They laughed a lot, and then Mrs. Shingleton would tell us ghost stories, the kids, and some of them were interesting, you know, and then we kids liked to get scared at ghost stories. She was 16 and he was 40 when they were married, and she came off the orphan train from New York and landed in Kansas City, Kansas, in a little farming community. And some mean couple adopted her and a brother, and they used them for a butler and a maid. They had to work. They were around 10 at the time. And then they died, and then the kids were adopted by a nice family there. And it was in Kansas or Missouri, somewhere near Kansas City. I'm not for certain. But the orphan train was something else interesting that we learned about from Mrs. Shingleton. And we didn't have a whole lot of aunts and uncles or cousins because we were a small family. But the Shingletons furnished us with, they were friends and almost like family. We were considered cousins, but we weren't really. And so those were happy days of childhood.
Okay, what do you remember of life living in the Depression, 1930s?
Oh, 1930. I was 5 years old in 1930, and my dad was on the police force, and he worked for the city, and we had, you know, shelter and food and clothing. And then there were many poor families lived around on WPA. The men couldn't find jobs, so they were on, they would, you know, repair streets and so forth, and they had big families. And they had just the minimum wage, where my dad had pretty good wage. And the police department would furnish baskets of food on Thanksgiving and Christmas and any holiday. They always furnished them a good Christmas meal. And
Your family got it or other people got it?
not my family, because my dad made a good salary, but, you know, just as a cop. And so we were considered better off than the WPA workers were. So he always put all the neighbors on the list where he worked, and made sure that they all got nice big, there were boxes that they had old turkey or ham and flour and all the trimmings for a huge dinner. But a lot of times they'd be laid off from WPA, and they were out of work in the Depression. And most of them rented homes. And sometimes they had to move if they were laid off to a lesser rental home. And so they moved in and out, the renters. And and then that Depression, like I said, we didn't feel too, we didn't do without anything, but we didn't have a surplus either. We didn't have, as children, we didn't have the advantages of like piano lessons. I always wanted to play piano. And dentist, we didn't have that advantage, although we'd go periodically, maybe once a year, or get a tooth pulled that was aching, or filling, or the tooth was aching. And so we had, I would say, material-wise, we had sufficient, except for no advantages. And my dad was a good provider, and he taught us many, many good lessons. I remember he always said, now don't lie, steal, or cheat. And to this day, it's hard for me to lie, even on insurance exams. I can't get insurance if I tell them the full truth. But once in a while, I'll tell a little white lie if it's kinder or convenient. But mostly I tell the truth. I try to. But there's times when I have to be smart and tell a little white lie, if it'll save someone's feelings or save my feelings. And I always taught the girls to, they're the best, and they deserve the best. And I think my dad sort of taught us that too. He taught us many good morals and principles and values. He wasn't perfect, but he was a good provider, and he taught us good morals, finish what we start. And one time I stole a ball out of a yard. I was 6 years old, and he said, where'd you get that ball? And I said, I took it out of that yard up the street. He says, well, take it back and put it in the yard and knock on the door and apologize. But the people were not home. So I took it back and just threw it over the little white fence in the yard, so I knocked and they weren't home, so I didn't have to apologize. And, but by example like that, I was only 6 years old, and I knew better, but I didn't know better. So he taught us many, many good lessons in morals. And then one time Martha and I lifted the lid at the dime store and took out a chocolate drop. We were hungry after school. My little friend lived in the neighborhood. And the manager, we were around 10, 11, 12. He said, "You girls, just what did you do?" We were chewing our chocolate drop and hungry after school on our way home. And we said, "We took a chocolate." And he says, "Well, I'm not going to have you arrested now, but he said, just let that be a lesson to you." So we didn't try to shoplift or anything after that. So that's one good thing my dad taught us, was be as honest as we could, and we should graduate high school at least. Those 2 lessons. And so he succeeded in providing and teaching. And he did love us because he kissed us goodbye before he went to work. And and he was a good provider. Even though one time I wanted a little princess coat like Queen Elizabeth. I was her age. And she wore a little princess coat, you know, fitted and a hat to match and leggings. And I asked him if I could have a princess coat, just little Princess Margaret of England. Their pictures were in the paper a lot. So he took me over town to a small clothing store. They didn't have any princess coats there. It was it wasn't a nice enough store. But they had a real pretty green coat that had a high collar, kind of a cape-like collar, and I remember it had a button here. And it was lined real nice. It was a kind of a green herringbone. And it was the warmest coat, and really quality coat. And I wore it, but at first I was a little disappointed. And I wore it, but what I really wanted was, but what I mean is he provided, but maybe not exactly what I wanted at that age. I was probably around 10. Well, they were still wearing princess line coats though. Princess Margaret, no, not Margaret, Princess Elizabeth is my age. And so, but all in all, I would say I had, the childhood was very insecure because my dad had just housekeepers, and they really didn't care about us kids as they should have.
You lost your mother.
Yeah,
That's
I lost
why.
my mother when I was 3 and a half.
Mm-hmm.
Sis said I was closer to 4. But that remains a trauma. I always wanted a mother.
Yeah.
So I would just love my friends' mothers, you know, and dads. Of course, my dad, I must say, he did very well in raising us, you know.
But mothers are more demonstrative with their love. They hug
so
and
I
say,
didn't feel very secure, you know, and because the housekeepers, they never hugged us or, you know.
not like a mother would.
No. So I always felt sort of like an orphan. But Sis, she's 7 years older than I, and she would sort of mother my brother and I. Brother was 4 years older than I. And she was the only mother we ever knew, you might say, that we knew cared about us. And so I tried to, with my own 2 daughters, I tried to make them feel loved unconditionally. I used to say, well, do the best you can in school. Get the best grade you can, but if it's the best, then we won't worry about it. So I never nagged them or pressured them. for good grades. And I just wanted them to feel secure and special. And they did. And they grew up to be good credits to us and have enough self-confidence in that they were special. And that's what I wanted for them. So they can be all they can be. And they are. They have become all that they can be, and I'm real proud of them because they are as good as a human being can be. Not perfect, but we don't like perfect people, but darn near. And
Thanks, Mom.
especially in their morals and principles, and as mothers, you just so hopefully my husband and I did something right, because they turned out just great. And in our old age, I'm 71 now, and when I had major surgery, they were so much help. And then their dad, he's had some health problems too, and they've been here for us, so we did something right in loving them unconditionally. And even though we might be a little cranky now in our old age, although I think of myself as mellow, although I'm not perfect either, and they still love us no matter, unconditionally, the way we tried to raise them. So good parenting, I realized from my upbringing that my dad taught me morals, principles, and values. And when I worked, I put in a day's work. And I always tried to do the right thing. That's what he wanted us to know and to do. Not only to know it, but to do it. So God's been good to us, and through the grace of God, we have had a happy life. More than, like I said, the downs. There's been a few downs, but mostly it's all been on the upbeat. Thank God. I guess that's the end. I'm all talked out.
Thanks, Mom.